Well, once again, welcome everyone. We're going to begin with prayer. So if you would join me in this prayer, if you can see it on the screen, if my head is in the way, there's one on the back as well. This is the prayer of Pope Francis at the conclusion of Evangelii Gaudium. Evangelii Gaudium, the English translation is the joy of the gospel. And my suspicion tonight is that we all share that joy. And that is in part why we're here tonight. And so let us begin with this beautiful prayer to Mary. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Mary, Virgin and Mother, you who moved by the Holy Spirit, welcomed the word of life in the depths of your humble faith. As you gave yourself completely to the Eternal One, help us to say our own yes to the urgent call, as pressing as ever, to proclaim the good news of Jesus. Filled with Christ's presence, you brought joy to John the Baptist, making him exult in the womb of his mother. Brimming over with joy, you sang of the great things done by God. Standing at the foot of the cross with unyielding faith, you received the joyful comfort of the resurrection and joined the disciples in awaiting the Spirit so that the evangelizing church might be born. Obtain for us now a new ardor born of the resurrection, that we may bring to all the gospel of life which triumphs over death. Give us a holy courage to seek new paths, that the gift of unfading beauty may reach every man and woman. Virgin of listening and contemplation, Mother of love, Bride of the eternal wedding feast, pray for the Church, whose pure icon you are, that she may never be closed in on herself or lose her passion for establishing God's kingdom. Star of the new evangelization, help us bear radiant witness to communion, service, ardent and generous faith, justice and love of the poor, that the joy of the gospel may reach to the ends of the earth, illuminating even the fringes of our world. Mother of the living gospel, wellspring of happiness for God's little ones, pray for us. Amen. Alleluia. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Every time I say this prayer, I get goosebumps. We're here for children, to bring them every day the joy of the gospel. And we know, watching our students as they graduate from our schools, that God's plan actually works. The research bears it out about Catholic schools. Our schools enjoy tremendous success in every area: social, emotional, academic, spiritual. They enjoy tremendous success throughout their lifetime as a result of being formed by the gospel and being in relationship with Jesus Christ, whom we find our joy in. So I welcome you tonight. That's the exciting part of what we do. And then we get down to business, right? And tonight we're going to talk about boards, governance, and leadership. And sometimes that may not be as exciting to some. I'm actually a little bit of a geek about this. I really enjoy it, so hopefully I can bring some energy to this along the way. I want tonight's session to be interactive. So I've built in a couple of places where we can do that, a couple of different ways that we can do that, so that hopefully it is an interaction between us and a learning opportunity for everyone. So our topic tonight is diocesan, parish, and school leadership. This is a bit of a mystery in the Catholic Church that takes a little bit to understand. And so we're going to delve into that a little bit and give you the background so that you can really understand all the alternative governance models that exist in Catholic schools, and that governance model which we use, which are boards of limited jurisdiction. So hopefully that's where we're going tonight. So my superintendent friends are famous for this saying: if you've seen one diocese, you've seen one diocese. Right? You can apply that when I talk to my pastor friends to, if you've seen one parish, you've seen one parish. And believe it or not, when we talk to our principals and boards, you can apply that to, if you've seen one Catholic school, you've seen one Catholic school. And I believe that there is a reason for this. And maybe there's many reasons for this. And I thought maybe now would be a good time for you to just turn to someone near you and have a short discussion about why does this ring true for so many people at so many levels of our church, whether it's diocese, parish, or school. Why do you think that might ring true? What's unique about the Catholic Church that might be reasons for why that rings true with some? Or maybe you can just share why maybe it rang true for you. Or maybe it didn't. You can share that too. So just take a couple of minutes and share with one another what that might be. Welcome.
I think therefore that each parish, therefore each school, and ultimately for the diocese built its own unique character. So it's not like you've seen one, you've seen them all. You've seen one, you've seen one.
Circumstance of the size of the area, that's, yeah, it makes it very
I am. Blind faith is not dominating. I grew up in the East Coast where Catholic were much. But it's very diverse. Other than that, it's very diverse. But religious.
All right, we're going to wheel in a few more chairs because we have some more folks coming. So please make room if you can at your tables. That's a great problem to have. We're glad you're all here. All right, so what are some of the ideas that anybody brave enough to say, hey, this is something we kind of talked about at our table? Some ideas that you might be willing to share? Yes?
cultural differences.
Cultural differences. Okay? If you've seen one, you've seen one. If you've seen one diocese, you've seen one diocese. And that's because of cultural differences in an area.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other thoughts? Yes, Jim.
Similarly, we said geographical differences, where within the Diocese of Grand Rapids, for example, ethnicity, income levels, ethnic makeup vary from parish to parish, therefore school to school. So when you've seen one, you've seen one.
Mm-hmm. Other ideas?
Demographics, ABVM's got a lot of younger families. I got a place up in Baldwin. When I go to St. Anne's there, one kid, no bear, it's an acolyte, altar server.
Right. Right.
Episcopal habits.
You bet. Excellent. Another one? Well, I don't want to put any of you on the spot anymore. I think you're all right. You're all right. And I want to point out something further. I want to suggest the reason this statement rings true within the church is because of a deeply held Catholic social principle that allows all of those things that you just said to come to life at the local level, right? And that's the principle of subsidiarity. How many of you have heard of the principle of subsidiarity before? Okay? This is a Catholic social principle, part of Catholic social doctrine. And this is what the Catechism says in part about the principle of subsidiarity. A community of a higher order should not interfere in the internal life of a community of a lower order, depriving the latter of its functions, but rather should support it in case of need and help to coordinate its activity with the activities of the rest of society, always with a view to the common good. So, another way of thinking about that is where decisions are made, they should be made to the extent possible and good for everyone, as close to the people who are affected by them as possible, right? And as beneficial. So the principle of subsidiarity, we want to take culture into effect. We want to take demographics into effect. We want to take the physical location into account, and lots of other things, right? And then the decisions that will affect those people will be best for them, right? So the principle of subsidiarity. And this is how the church functions in many, many ways. The bishop has very real authority as the primary teacher and shepherd of his flock. The pastor has very real authority as the primary teacher and shepherd of his flock, based upon the authority given to him by the bishop. And many of our schools have been given authority through their boards of limited jurisdiction to have also very real authority within the school. And so we get lots of differences, right? So what I'm going to tell you are things that are principles that you can apply at the local level, but they don't mean that because you're all in the same training, you're all going to look the same when you're all done, because of the principle of subsidiarity. So I want to take an anonymous poll. How many of you brought your phone with you, your electronic device, or have an electronic device you have access to? All right, if you wouldn't mind getting that out, we're going to take a live poll here. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm going to ask you 2 questions, and it's anonymous, so you don't have to worry. You can answer honestly. Based upon your current understanding, I want to know who owns responsibility for your school. And what I mean by that is not who owns the building or the property, but who owns the responsibility for your school. All right? So that'll be the first question. And the second one is, what type of governing body do you have? We're just going to go through this really quickly. So this is called Poll Everywhere. How many of you have used Poll Everywhere before? Excellent. So all you have to do is, in the to box up above, type the number 37607 in a regular text message. 37607, that's the number you're texting to. And then in the text box, type DOGR Schools. And it doesn't matter whether it's caps or lowercase, just DOGR Schools, all one word. Send it, and you will join my class or my session. And you'll get a message back that says you've joined. When you have that, would you just raise your hand that you've joined? Excellent. All right. This is helping me. If you see someone next to you that's gotten in and you're not, maybe lean over for a little help. Excellent. Is everybody in? All right. It may cut us off at about 40 because I used the free version. So the first 40 to respond will be in. So who owns responsibility for your school? And I see that starting to populate. Now, if you type an answer, A, B, C, D, or E, and you realize you hit the wrong one and sent it, just type undo in there and send that, and it'll undo your answer, and you can redo your answer. Okay, when you've had a chance to input your answer, raise your hand just so that I have a sense of, again, how many have been successful. All right, we'll wait just a couple more seconds. So these are the possibilities The diocese could own responsibility. The parish could own responsibility. Interparochial or regional means that you're owned by more than one parish. That responsibility is owned by more than one parish. Religious congregation would represent a specific religious order that's running the school. And then independent private means that it's an independent private school. So, interestingly enough, you probably mostly got this right. And we'll see here, these are the types that we have in the diocese. So, those of you who answered religious congregation, we have none of those in the diocese. Some dioceses have them. We do not have a school run by a religious order. If any of you know a religious order that would like to run a school in our diocese, would you please call me? Because we'd love to get to know them, for sure. So these are the types of schools that we have, and these are the ones that are represented. So the two diocesan-owned schools are Catholic Central and West Catholic. I'm going to skip down to interparochial or regional. Corpus Christi Catholic School is a interparochial school owned by two parishes. All Saints Academy is an interparochial school owned by 4 parishes. DPA is an interparochial school owned by 2 parishes. And SJDA, which is San Juan Diego Academy, DPA is Divine Providence, by the way, All Saints Academy, and Divine Providence and San Juan Diego Academy, that's SJDA, is also an interparochial school, which is a little interesting in its organization. It isn't as much owned by 6 parishes as it is a collaboration of 6 parishes. And it has a separate juridic person, which is a notation in canon law about how that is run and organized. So those are the types of ownership that we have within the diocese. So does everyone know now where you are, what the correct answer is for your school? How many of you got it right? You don't have to answer that, but it's kind of fun. All right. And how many of you learned something just now? Awesome. Okay, this one's a little easier because if you've been paying attention, I've sort of given away the answer. But if you wouldn't mind, what type of governing body do you have? Maybe I should ask, how does your governing body work? Rather than what type you have. Because I think we have a lot of the same kind, but we have some that don't actually work as a board of limited jurisdiction, which is why we're having this meeting tonight. Okay, when you've had a chance to answer, just raise your hand so I get a sense of the room. Excellent. Isn't this fun? This is so fun. Pretty much we're on track there. We do not have any advisory boards left in the diocese, with the exception of our diocesan board, which is the bishop's Catholic school board. All right. But all of our local school boards are boards of limited jurisdiction. And we may have a school with a jurisdictional board, which we'll talk about in a second, but it still is, even though it might think it's jurisdictional, it is limited by its Catholic identity. So we'll talk about that here in a second. So if we back up to these types, when you see that independent private school, those are Muskegon Catholic Central. Ken is here, president of Muskegon Catholic Central, and St. Robert's in Ada. Those are independent or private Catholic schools. They are limited jurisdiction by they have to submit to becoming and being a Catholic school in order to be called a Catholic school within the diocese. And so that's how they're limited. Outside of that, they truly are independent. So, depending on who had that answer, Otherwise, all of our boards are boards of limited jurisdiction. Boards of limited jurisdiction. But remember, we have several different types. Diocesan-owned, parish-owned, interparochially owned, and independent or private in our diocese. Then the fifth type is religious order school. Again, if anyone wants to invite one of those here, just call me up. I'd love to have them. Well, we would have to talk to Bishop about that, but... So, we are going to explore the following topics tonight. There's also an other category here, and I'm wondering which one of these is the one that most of you want to know more about. Alternative governance models, why we have boards of limited jurisdiction, under what conditions does a board of limited jurisdiction work. Anytime you see BOLJ, Board of Limited Jurisdiction, about the roles and responsibilities, the desired makeup, or other. This is great. I actually have this one figured out so that it's counting the number of people. So it gives me a sense of everyone in the room. I couldn't figure out how to get the other one set up that way. I don't know what I did differently. Anyway, I'll figure that out someday. So we're getting close. We're getting close. There's nobody that wants to know about why? All right, I'll go really fast over that. Really fast over that. As I suspected, most of you want to know more about the roles and responsibilities of the Board of Limited Jurisdiction. Let's first start with what are the alternatives and how do they work. So I think it's important to understand this if we want to understand what we are and what we are not, right? So believe it or not, one option among Catholic schools is no board at all. No board at all. About 15% of Catholic schools still have no board at all. Who is their governing body? Anyone want to venture a guess? The priest, the pastor. Yes. So when tonight we talk about things like the traditional Catholic school, on a later slide, that's what people are referring to when they say the traditional parish school is broken, right? And most have moved away from that or are moving away from that towards some other type of board. It's just a reference for later. Keep that in mind. But 15% of them, even today, still have no board. Advisory boards are boards where there must be one, but the pastor or CA stands for canonical administrator. So sometimes the bishop appoints an administrator to a parish. That person is the canonical administrator. And the pastor is automatically the canonical administrator of a parish. So the pastor or the canonical administrator is not bound by the advice, but he has to have an advisory committee or an advisory board. Then we have consultative boards. That's what we were prior to 2011. Consultative boards. That means that the pastor must consult with the board, but once again is not bound by that consultation or advice. So I worked for 17 years in a consultative board. Technically, but honestly, because of the pastor and his willingness to delegate authority to that board, we operated more like a board of limited jurisdiction. Some of you may have as well prior to 2011. And we have boards of limited jurisdiction. Now, there are two names for this. Boards of limited jurisdiction, some people call them boards of specified jurisdiction. Boards tend to like the word specified better. Pastors tend to like the word limited better. Can anyone guess why? Yeah, I think it's kind of obvious. We chose limited. It was an easier transition from consultative to boards of limited jurisdiction than it was to call them boards of specified jurisdiction. Not that it matters. It's the same thing. So I want you to understand that tonight. This means that the pastor or canonical administrator actually shares delegated authority with the board. So all of you who are a member of a board have delegated authority by your pastor, canonical administrator, your local church authority. And so your role is critical to the church, and I would like to just say thank you for the work that you do. And as we talk more about your roles and responsibilities, you'll know why I'm thanking you. I think the last kind of board is a jurisdictional board. This is a board that has final authority. These generally don't exist in the Catholic Church. Can anyone guess why? That thing called Catholic identity, right? Our bishops have an interest in making sure that our Catholic schools remain Catholic schools. And many lay people that may be members of a board of jurisdiction don't have the theological training, maybe don't understand the teachings of the church to the same degree, and as a result, the concern would be that we would start to have Catholic schools slip away from their Catholic identity. So they're very, very rare in the church, and when we do have them, they're under very carefully constructed rules and regulations. So the last two kinds of boards are actually policy-making boards. And believe it or not, in 2011, only 11% of boards in Catholic school boards in the United States were policy-making, which means they were either had no board, they were advisory, or they were consultative. Those types of boards are being found to be broken today. Broken today. Why would you think that might be the case? It's not the case everywhere, but in some cases, in many cases, they just don't work well. In those top three, who is the main person with all the responsibility? The pastor. How many of your pastors today have large parishes or multiple parishes and no associate or deacon involved, right? So we have this thing called a pastor shortage, particularly in our diocese right now. It's true across the country. It's not true in every country, that's for sure. But it is true here currently. And so pastors are stretched thin. And so pastors don't have the time they used to have to engage in learning all the aspects of a school they would need to know in order to operate the school. It also used to be that pastors were, in most communities, had the highest education of most people in the parish, right? That's not true anymore. It's not true anymore, at least not here in the United States. And so by engaging boards of limited jurisdiction, we have some opportunity that we did not have at many times in our past. So interestingly enough, that number, I don't have any recent statistics since 2011, but I would guess that today that's getting closer to 40 or 50%. 40 or 50%. Many, many dioceses across the country are moving toward boards of limited jurisdiction. So at this point, I just want to stop a second, and if you have something else that you were hoping we were going to explore tonight that we haven't, that wasn't on that previous list, right? You're welcome to put it in here through using Poll Everywhere, just so that we have a record of, is there something else, and then I can pay close attention to that as we're going through these next sections. So if there's something on your mind that you really wanted to know about, and you want to put it there so that we can all take a look at it, again, nobody will know who put it there, so you're safe. Excellent. Onboarding process for new members. policy review. Good. We're going to touch on these things. All right, I'll peek back at that in a second. Remind me to do that in case someone wants to put some other things up there. So quickly, because this is the area nobody wanted to hear about, but why we have boards of limited jurisdiction, I mean, you know, when you've delegated some authority to others, it signals a high level of trust to those individuals. It empowers them to take a greater sense of ownership and responsibility. And certainly ownership and responsibility was the reason in 2011 we made the move to boards of limited jurisdiction. We needed more people to own and be responsible for our schools. We needed more people thinking about, caring about, and taking that responsibility on. And the good news is it increases the involvement and expert services that we receive. So that's all the time I'm going to spend because you didn't want to hear that much about that. So under what conditions does a board of limited jurisdiction work? Well, the main reason or the main condition you all want to know more about is, you know, understanding clearly defined roles and responsibilities. So I want to point you to the first sheet in your packet right now, and this is a part of the onboarding process of a new board member. If I'm the principal or the board chair, I'm going to point you in the direction of this instruction sheet. This instruction sheet. The instructions will take you through exactly how to access all the training materials that are available to you, but I'm going to spend a moment with you here, and I'm going to go there so you can see how I get to them and to see all the things that are available to a new board member. So I'm going to go to the diocesan website, grdiocese.org. grdiocese.org. I'm going to get to the schools page, which you could also get to by just going to Catholic Schools for You, the number 4u.org. Either one gets you there. I'm going to click on schools here. And then you see in the drop-down menu this Office of Catholic Schools Resources. So I'm going to click on Office of Catholic Schools Resources. And it's going to bring me to a lot of resources. Now, in the new mobile format, we have to make sure you can scroll a lot, right? I'm getting used to this, but you have to scroll down a ways. You'll see some of these people are familiar in the room. Thank you, some of our board members, for being here. But go past our board and get to this part that's called School Board Training, Strategic Planning, and Governance. We're going to spend the majority of our time in these documents and talking about this material tonight. So that instruction sheet is actually even more updated here because we just updated it today for you. If you click on it, you'll notice that the picture is a little different. The instructions are the same, but the picture is a little bit different. So this one's even more updated than the one that you have in your hands. And I always like to point out to people, remember that the password is board. Board, it says it right here, but some of the materials are proprietary, so you have to type in the password and then you have access to all of it. Going back to that board training materials. You'll see here that the fundamental premises for all board members, there's a video and a PDF, an accompanying PDF. That is one I'd recommend for everybody, right? And then depending upon the committee that you might serve on, you'll find one for you, right? With a video and some accompanying PDF. There is good information there. If you spend a little time in there, you will benefit from that. I'm going to skip down to this governance model types and descriptions. And the second item that you have in your packet is this one, Catholic School Boards with Limited Jurisdiction. This is sort of a summary. If you wanted to point to one piece of paper that's going to help you understand Catholic School Boards of Limited Jurisdiction this would be the page I would bring you to. And this is also going to give you a summary of your roles and responsibilities, which I'm just going to take a little bit of time going through with you tonight. So the definition: a board with limited jurisdiction as defined in a primer on educational governance in the Catholic Church says a board with limited jurisdiction, also called a policy-making board, is a body that participates in the policy-making process by formulating, adapting, and enacting policy. The board has been delegated final authority to enact policy regarding certain areas of institutional operation, certain areas, although its jurisdiction is limited to those areas of operation that have been delegated to it by the Constitution and or the bylaws and approved by the delegating church authority. So, you see there how a board of limited jurisdiction is made up, but I really want to point to this next section, board responsibilities. Subject to the reserved powers held by the pastor, superintendent, and bishop CEO, the board of directors is responsible for, I like that strategic planning shows up first, because it is really your agenda. So strategic planning, the formulation of local school policies, those all, notice there's a note there, all policies must be consistent and not contradict diocesan policy. That's to make sure we don't get any legal problems and that we cover our bases, right? Evaluation of the principal under the direction of the pastor according to a process established by the superintendent. So that's a pretty well-defined process called the principal appraisal process, and it involves the board, the pastor, and the principal. And in the end, I get to sign off that it was done well. Some pastors choose a different model. It's fine, as long as they're using a model and the board is brought into a couple aspects of that. Those are important to note. And then effectiveness of local school policies and plans, effectiveness of board operations, so you have to actually evaluate yourself, and the overall mission effectiveness of the school. You have oversight of financial operations, oversight of and participation in institutional advancement or development. That includes several things: marketing, communications, admissions, enrollment, and development and fundraising. Those are all institutional advancement. And ultimately, mission effectiveness. All of the different committees contribute to your overall mission effectiveness. Now, the next item on the PowerPoint is actually those responsibilities are limited by these reserved powers. In other words, reserved powers are reserved to the bishop, the pastor, myself, or the CFO, chancellor here at the diocese. So that's just to make sure that all schools are operating in accordance with diocesan policy and direction. And you'll see here there's not many. There's 11, but it's really not that many when you look at these. So let's just go through them. Approval of the philosophy and mission statement for the school. How many of your schools have that all done already? Right. Is that limiting anything you have to do? Not at all. Establishment of the board of directors as a board with limited jurisdiction. That's already been done. Appointment of directors. That is something you will be engaged in annually, right? Annually. So that you're limited because you do need to have the pastor's appointment for those members and technically be in contact with me about those. Now, I will tell you, the only two schools that do that are our diocesan-owned schools, because I'm also their canonical administrator. So typically, boards do not check with me before they appoint new members. It wouldn't be a bad idea. It wouldn't be a bad idea. It is something we're asking of you, but I will tell you that's an area we're not managing well currently. Approval of the bylaws for the board of directors. Again, those are already done for you. They were done in 2011. There is a specific process by which you can make changes, but changes should be rare. They really aren't all that necessary. Sometimes there's a local nuance that you'd like to add. Those, again, if you're doing that work is reserved. There are reserved powers where the pastor, the bishop, and I have some say in that.
Dave,
Yeah.
is that something that as a board you should document you reviewed annually, or is there like even though you're not gonna change it, is that
It's
an expectation?
best practice to review bylaws annually, right? You should all get a copy when you're oriented to the board. I'm going to go through where you'll see all of that, where you'll find it. But you should have ready access to your bylaws for meetings, especially the chair, because there are going to be times when questions arise and you need to know what the bylaws say to give direction to your board. All right, approval for capital improvements, additions, or structural changes. So schools go through that occasionally, but those are few and far between normally. Approval for borrowing. Again, boards are usually not involved in that. Approval and ratification of the annual operating budget. So you create the budget, you approve the budget, it has to be ratified by your pastor and by the diocese. So the way that happens in parishes with schools is the parish submits its budget to the Office of Administration and Finance. They approve the budget. So that doesn't actually happen through my office. It happens through that office. Approval and ratification of appointment of legal counsel and approval to initiate or defend litigation. Again, we want to be directly engaged in that with you, and you'll want us to be. You'll want us to be. Approval of auditing counsel when applicable. Right now, that's only applicable to our two high schools, two diocesan-owned high schools. The diocese otherwise has a process it uses for parish review, but those are not by a professional auditor. And then oversight to ensure no alienation of church property. This is why the bishop wants myself, the pastor, to be engaged, just to make sure that schools aren't selling off a piece of property or doing something that's going to create later a problem for the church. And then ultimately, 11 is the appointment, evaluation, renewal, or termination of the principal, CEO, in consideration of the board's recommendation. So the board needs to make a recommendation there, and according to a process established by the superintendent of schools. Now, I would dare say that most of these 11 items are not the things you deal with on a regular basis at your board meetings, right? They might be something you deal with once a year or on a periodic basis, but they're not the typical things you deal with at your board, which means and suggests that those are the only things you're limited by. So you've been given very real authority to act in your schools in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways. So let's skip back to our presentation here for a second. So we just talked about those limited or specified jurisdiction and those reserved powers, what that means to have reserved powers. And I gave you the example of the summary sheet in your packet. This also means that the condition that we need to have in order for this to work is that you're willing to accept delegated authority. A lot of people are asked to be on a board, and they like to be on the board because they like to offer their opinion. But when they walk away, it's not my problem, right? On a board of limited jurisdiction, when you walk away, it's kind of still your problem. So we need people willing to accept and own the responsibility of those kinds of things, right? We need a balanced makeup. Now, this is another area where we've been working at this for 9 years. How many of you in this room are parents? Okay. Some of you not necessarily of the board where you serve. That's good. But about half of you, right? That's good. We're moving in the right direction. But we should really have no more than 40% parents. And the reason for that is it often leads the board in directions that they really shouldn't be spending the majority of their time. Parents want to talk about what happened yesterday, today, and tomorrow and next week. Boards should be focused mostly on what's going to happen a year, 3 years, 5 years from now, right? And a lot of parents would be like, well, my kids won't even be here then. I don't care about that. So we have to have board members that understand and care about Catholic education to the extent that they're willing to own that responsibility, accept it, and not just assume that it's going to be taken care of by someone else.
Dave,
Yeah.
on that 40% recommendation, do the principal and pastors count towards that, or is this just the volunteers?
Just the volunteers. Principal.
40% of the volunteers.
Yes.
No
Yes.
More than 40% of volunteers.
Right. Right.
Quick.
Yes.
Has there been any sort of successful method to recruit people? Maybe somebody here might speak to how you got interested in the board, because at ABBM, we're probably 90% parents, right?
It's easiest to get parents. That's why we tend to have that. I'd be interested too in Ben's question. Does anyone have a method they've used?
We started focusing on competency-based board members. So we looked at the competencies that we needed on the board: marketing, finance. Parenting wasn't a competency that led them to the board. And then we used our board to canvass the community to say, do you know a good marketing person? Do you know a good finance person that aren't necessarily parents of students in the school? And we've been quite successful bringing outsiders, even in one case, a non-parishioner one, a non-parishioner, non-parent. And it's worked very well for us, but we focused on the competency, not the relationship.
And that's exactly what you need to focus on, is the competency and not the relationship. It gives you a much more professionally trained board with expertise, as well as more objective about the decisions that are being made, rather than subjective based upon, well, that's going to mean this for my child or someone I know, right? So great. Ben, one of the other things I've heard is some parishes have a census, right? An electronic census. When someone registers for the parish, they actually ask them what they do. And you can actually search that database for the kind of skills you're looking for. I know in the parish where I am and where I was principal, we used that method, and it was amazing. Names surfaced that I never even knew existed in the parish. And it's amazing when the pastor or the principal, depending on the relationship, approach someone and say, I understand that you're an accountant. We're in need of an accountant for our school board. Would you be willing to consider serving on the board? It's an amazing experience oftentimes that lots of people, even though they don't have children, or their children are graduated and gone, are happy to help out when they're asked to serve in that way. So absolutely competency-based, which is expert makeup, right? We need experts on our board. They're not just representatives, not just the people who really want to serve and have something to say, but those who have expertise to offer. And then another condition that they work well under is really the work of the board needs to happen at the committee level. The board meeting then is just really presentation in advance, in writing, of the work of the committee, so that the board as a whole can read it, digest it, and prepare questions that can be asked at the board level, so that they all have an understanding of why that item is being recommended. All right. So we already kind of touched on these in that other document which I gave you, which looks a lot nicer than the cut and pasted version right out of the actual model. But further, on the roles and responsibilities, these are the things the board is engaged in and needs expert help with. Mission effectiveness. Now, in the Mission Effectiveness Committee, we typically look for someone who has a theology background, someone who has done ministry work, someone who understands the mission of the church as a Christian organization. But we're also looking for people who have organizational ability, someone who can see the whole. Is it working? You know, are all the aspects of our mission working? Academically, spiritually, emotionally, socially, are all those things working? We need people who have strategic planning background and ability. Have either worked for a business or a company that does strategic planning, have lots of experience with that. We find that an excellent resource are communications people, marketing people, public relations people. They all seem to, and our expert is in the back of the room, Sue Haas Williams, who is our resident expert on our diocesan board, who has really been the person, the engine behind our diocesan strategic planning. And Sue is a marketing, PR, communications professional. Policy. This is where you might ask an attorney to be on your board. Don't overload your board with attorneys. Sorry, Andrew, but attorneys are really, really important, right? And they know the kinds of things you should be asking or you shouldn't be asking. They know maybe where they don't have expertise. But if you have too many attorneys on your board, sometimes you're asking those questions a lot, right? And we want to make sure that because we have diocesan schools policy, right, we're going to always make sure that our policy has been reviewed by attorneys that have appropriate expertise and who would be the very people who would defend the diocese or the parish in the event of any litigation, so that the policies have all been reviewed there. So we're not really looking for attorneys to review policy necessarily at the local level, other than those nuances you add to policy, and then they can say, well, that might be something you want to have reviewed, or you might want to run by the diocesan attorneys to see what their take might be. Finance people, we always need finance people, and those seem to be the easiest ones to find. Accountants, people who are in the finance world of some kind, in some professional position. The hardest place to find expertise is this area of institutional advancement, or some people call that development. But institutional advancement really makes up marketing, communications, admissions enrollment, and development and fundraising. So it's that whole group of things. When we look at our diocesan strategic plan, we've made progress in 2 of the 3. I shouldn't say we haven't made progress in the 3rd, in that area of development and fundraising. We have, but it hasn't been as a result of shared services that we've been able to offer to all of our schools. It's been a result of our diocesan board's work and those on the development committee, like Andrew, who is not only an attorney but has incredible expertise in this area of institutional advancement. Building and grounds. Who are those architects? Who are those engineers? Who are the people who are facility managers? People who really have an eye for it. They can walk through your school and they can tell you right now what's the life of something, or who to call to find out what the life of your roof is, and who to call to find out what the life of your boiler is, and who to call in all those circumstances, so that you can have an excellent facilities plan. And then recruitment of new members is an area that we've overlooked over the last 9 years in many, many, many ways. I think we only have one board now. Catholic Central is developing a committee on new members. And there aren't many other boards that actually have developed a committee with expertise in this area. So what we're looking for here are talent acquisition specialists, recruiters. You know, these kinds of people that every company today has, right? And we need them on our boards because it's a job to find the right competencies for a board. And it's a job to train those people in the skills they need to have. And there's two roles of this committee. Committee on new directors, a committee on directors, or recruitment of new members. There's two jobs, A, the recruitment, but B, the training. And it's that training aspect that everyone at our summits continues to tell us, we need more training, we need more training, we need more training. Partially because it's not happening necessarily at the local level either, right? So those are incredibly important skills that we need to be attracting to our boards going forward. And then finally, the board has a role in evaluation. And we saw the list of the things, and they're on your sheet, of what the board is evaluating. But here I want to talk for a second about evaluating your board's performance, evaluating your own board's performance. I want to show you a rubric. I think it's the next sheet in your packet. And it's the one that looks like this. It's a rubric. So this is right out of a Catholic School Governance Handbook for a New Era. This is a 2018 publication from NCEA. This is all aligned to the National Standards and Benchmarks for Effective Catholic Elementary and Secondary Schools, or we call them the NESBECs for short. So it's aligned to the NESBECs, and very quickly, using this rubric, you can sort of assess how your board is performing. So I'm going to have you take just a moment at your table with that rubric, have a little discussion about, you know, just kind of looking at that. Are you a startup? Are you novice? Are you stretch? Are you stuck? Or are you high functioning according to this rubric? Take a look at that for a second, have a little discussion around your table, and then we'll gather some thoughts around that. take about 30 seconds to wrap up your conversation.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a non-parent.
Okay, let's see if the rubric was at all helpful or applicable to you. How many of you, in a very honest way, feel like maybe your board is still sort of in that startup stage? Glad to hear that. It's been a while, so I'm really glad to hear that. How about it still feels newly formed? I know that we have some boards that have had a high turnover in a very short period of time. Sometimes those can feel newly formed. I see some shaking heads. Yeah? How about stretch, or kind of stretching? Yeah? Some of those descriptors looked about right. Anyone stuck? Feel kind of stuck right now?
Like we're straddling, stretched and stuff.
We are
Yeah.
straddling.
Yeah. And then how many of you feel your board is high functioning, is operating at that level? That's exciting to see a number of hands. Yeah. Fantastic. We're seeing more and more of those, the more training, and I think the summits, 2 years of summits now, in the fall and in the spring, getting boards, committees together to share best practice has been a really effective way to start moving that needle as well.
Why you have a note here, no curriculum or personnel?
Yes, I'm really glad you brought that up. First of all, one more point. I wanted to kind of take you through this 60-40 rule. 1 second. This kind of goes back to that 40% parents, right? So the idea of 60% non-parents keeps you in compliance with this, what I call the 60-40 rule, right? 60% of your time you're spending doing all of the above, thinking about the future. 40% of your time you might have a report from a teacher, the principal's report, talking about something that's more immediate or day-to-day operation of the school. But the more parents you have, the more likely it is you're going to be having a discussion about something that happened very recently or is coming up. And you want to, not that those aren't important, they are important. You just want to kind of focus on that. And I have this note here, Chuck, as you pointed out. Notice it says no curriculum or personnel. That is not the role of the board. The board has no jurisdiction over curriculum. The board has no jurisdiction over personnel, with the exception of how the board may be engaged by the pastor in the evaluation of the school leader or the principal CEO. So it gets really, it can get really sloppy and messy, in my experience, when you have a curriculum committee at your school, because oftentimes curriculum committees would be made up of experts in curriculum, right? Well, you've hired a whole school full of them. And they've been trained to be Catholic school teachers, not just teachers, but they are catechist trained as well, right? There's a difference between what a Catholic school teacher does and what a public school teacher does. And oftentimes, what we get on curriculum committees is someone who works in a public school says, I want to be on the board, I want to be on the curriculum committee. Or even sometimes we get a retired teacher or someone like that who just has a passion for education. And often, if that is a parent, they want to see the textbooks. They want to start talking about the specific day-to-day curriculum that the kids are using in the classroom. It's not the role of the board. You've hired a faculty to do that. That's their responsibility. Now, you might have a retired teacher on your board, wonderful, who also has expertise in something like strategic planning or Marketing, has a tremendous communications background. You know, there are lots of reasons why a teacher might be on your board. Just keep them out of the direct curriculum area. You could also have a teacher on your board, or a retired teacher on your board, who was in a Catholic school for many, many years and is passionate about the mission effectiveness, the overall mission effectiveness of the school. And clearly, if when the principal is presenting to you the test scores for the school, and you see that the math scores seem to be weak compared to other areas, as a board, you have the right to ask the question, can you tell us a little bit more about that? And what are you doing to improve math scores? And then the experts, the teachers, the principal, come in and address the board around that concern. Does that make sense? So, and the area of personnel, again, we just don't want to be having boards engaged in personnel. It's again, very messy. That's the role of the principal, to hire and fire the faculty. And the principal may bring to the board in a closed or executive session concerns that they want the board to be aware of before maybe some information hits the general population. They may also bring that to you in executive session for some feedback specifically on an area. Again, appropriate for the board to give feedback to the principal in that area. But no personnel committee making hiring and firing decisions and that sort of thing. Yes?
How about compensation guidelines?
Absolutely, and I would call that finance work.
Okay.
Absolutely, you bet. Compare finances to all kinds of other models and schools and places in the country, and strengthen your compensation model. Absolutely. All right, the desired makeup, faithful. 90% Catholic is what we say. Sometimes within your community you can't find someone to help you with facilities management. Maybe you have a city manager that does that all the time and actually sees your school as an important function of the community. Most of the time our Catholic schools are an important function in the community, and all the community leaders know that. So they don't mind sometimes serving on your board when you're looking for an expertise that you can't find. We've already talked about the balance. Diverse. It's really important that you think about the diversity of your board. And there's a couple different matrices that we can provide you that help you label your board members according to their skills and according to their diverse attributes, so that you can really get a diverse perspective on your board. We've talked about experts, and obviously we want folks who are committed to Catholic education. These are resources that I'm happy to make this presentation available to you. These are resources that I've used in putting together the presentation that you might want to delve into more. They have great resources in them. A primer for education on Catholic governance in the Catholic Church is kind of that's the Bible of Catholic school governance, put out by NCEA in 2009. Then we have this new one, which actually the Catholic School Handbook, or Catholic Governance Handbook for a New Era, that was aligned to the National Standards and Benchmarks, the NSBECs we call them, which is what our accreditation is based upon, by the way. The NSBECs, the National Standards and Benchmarks for Effective Catholic Elementary and Secondary Schools. And then this last one I want to spend a little time with you on, because it's fun. It is called Breathing New Life into Catholic Schools, an exploration of Catholic school governance models. And it really highlights some innovative models. Ours is one of them, not highlighted in this particular document, but I'd like to show you why ours is an innovative model, considered an innovative model. And it was put out by Fatica in 2014. And Fatica is Foundations and Donors Interested in Catholic Activities, a national organization. Foundations and Donors Interested in Catholic Activities. So they put out this initial study that highlighted about 20 different dioceses who were doing something innovative in terms of Catholic school governance. And they described each one. And soon they'll have a companion report that is kind of like 7, 8 years later, right? What did we find? Is it working? Isn't it working? That sort of thing. But they did something really cool in this report. They created this matrix that really helps us understand governance in a new way, I think, and in a real strategic way. So I want to spend a little time understanding what's on this matrix. So if you look at the horizontal axis, this is the authority structure within the school. And this is the continuum from executive, the pastor, right, all the way to collegial, where we have along the way the different types of boards that we've talked about, right? We know we still have some no boards, some advisory, some consultative. We've moved to boards of limited jurisdiction, and then there are a couple of, or few jurisdictional boards within the Catholic Church. And then you have the control, either local control all the way to central control, right? And you have some terms, independent, collaborative, so we're all still independent, but we're collaborating together, network, consortium, system. Those are all described in this Fatica document, which you can download, the free PDF. Any of you can get it and download it. It's fascinating. So remember earlier I talked to you about the traditional parish school. When people talk about the traditional parish school being broken, this is the one they're talking about. No board, complete local control. Why do you think that's broken? What are some reasons why that's broken today? Resources. It's difficult for any one parish to have all the resources they need. Universally, for sure. Right? Some parishes may not have trouble, but many others would. We already talked about what's happened to our pastors, right? Kind of busy, stretched thin. They're no longer the most educated person in the community necessarily. Any other?
Legal?
Sorry?
Legal?
Legal, yeah. I mean, if you're sitting over here all by yourself as a parish with not many resources, I mean, are you going to have access to really make sure what you're doing is legal, given the amount you pay an attorney to kind of make sure that that's the case, right?
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale, absolutely, absolutely. So all these are reasons why that traditional parish school model is broken. I just don't want to confuse anyone that the parish school is broken, because it's not. In fact, the parish school, in my opinion, and in most of the superintendent's opinions that I know, believe it's still the Cadillac model. It is still the best model. And for one primary reason. And that's because in a parish school, when you look at the percentage of baptized children that are enrolled in that school, parish schools win hands down compared to any other model. Parish schools win over the regional school. I mean, I can ask Corpus Christi or All Saints Academy, Divine Providence. Now Divine Providence, we've done a unique thing at Divine Providence, so you're still at the local parish with a school. But Corpus Christi and All Saints Academy could easily share why this becomes difficult. I'm not going to put them on the spot, but when the school is out of sight, it's often out of mind. If it's not on the campus of the particular parish, pastors tend to disengage. It is very difficult to run an excellent Catholic school without pastoral leadership. Nearly impossible, right? So you have to have someone committed to that. And the further you get away from the parish, the harder it is to enroll the students from that parish in that school. Now, you get what you pay for. The parish model can be expensive, right? Especially the smaller you get, the more expensive it gets for the parish, right? And so in some cases, we can't run a parish school anymore. Should we just eliminate Catholic education? Of course not. So we're looking for other innovative models. Regional schools are a perfect example of how that can work. All right, so that's my little soapbox about parish schools versus other types. There are groups out there that would want you to believe that other types of innovations are better. I just think all we got to do is move that parish school around in this matrix to the sweet spot, wherever that is for that particular community. And there's no right or wrong answer here. It's what works best for that particular community. So, for example, St. Robert's. They are an independent private school, but they are located at a parish. We designed it to look and feel like a parish school. So actually St. Robert's would be over here because they are actually a board of limited jurisdiction moving toward a jurisdictional board, but independent local control, right? It's an innovative model. We're hoping it works extremely well. It's located at a parish. It has the look and feel of a parish school. And our parish schools have been on a trajectory that looks kind of like, and I'm going to do this for the video because this is kind of a nice way to do it. I'm going to grab a pen here, color it green. Our schools have been somewhere between advisory and consultative prior to 2011. So they've been on a path from local, very siloed, very competitive with one another, very parochial in nature, right, in 2011, on a path that looks kind of like this, right? And some of you just told me that you have high-functioning boards of limited jurisdiction, right? Which means you're more collegial in your approach, and as a result of our diocesan strategic plan, we are moving toward an alliance of Catholic schools. Now, that word isn't on that list, but it is closer to what a network of schools would be. It's taking advantage of a network of shared services to benefit economies of scale, expertise, best practice, and so on, to lift all of our schools. So that's the path that most of our schools have been on, is that path. And they're all along the way. You know, there's schools here and there's schools here, and this is very subjective, by the way. So, but it helps you think about where's your board strategically and where does your board want to go? What will serve your parish community best? All right? Now, I want to suggest that schools across the nation have been making this kind of progress. Catholic schools have been making this kind of progress toward a better application of two principles of Catholic social teaching or Catholic social doctrine. Right? The first one we talked about is that principle of subsidiarity, and we've been really good at that. The local level, local control, very parochial in nature, right? We haven't been quite as good at the second principle of Catholic social thought, which is the principle of solidarity. Now, these don't work against each other. They actually work together both toward the common good, right? And so I think Catholic schools have been working hard to balance these two principles of Catholic social teaching, and this is how that kind of looks, right? So I have overlaid my thought process on top of the Fatica report, which doesn't talk about this. But I think this has been the dynamic here, and I think this is the dynamic across the country, is this sort of movement from more principle of subsidiarity being sort of the guiding principle to more of a balanced approach. Any questions about that? Yes?
Do you see, like, if the principals and the school boards that are on now wanting to move more towards having more of a centralized network of schools to share economy of scale? Was there any pushback from anybody, or is that something that everyone's getting on board?
You know, at first there was a lot of pushback. Particularly, it was pushback though from pastors. Some pastors, limited number of pastors, who wanted to be more engaged and really be, have that authority in their school. And the only other pushback I think would be from board members who didn't really understand their role. What are you talking about, or what does this mean, or how do I do it, that sort of thing. But the last couple of years since we've started the board summits, and we're bringing committees together from around the diocese, I don't think there is pushback. I think people want to take on that responsibility. They want to know what our best practice is. What am I supposed to be doing? How can I do this better? Seems to be the feeling I get today. Not a ton of pushback that it shouldn't be this way, right? So I think we just got to get better at it. And we're going to get better at it by studying it together, by sharing resources, sharing best practice with one another. Good question. Any others?
Is there a way that the best practices are being disseminated
Yes.
where everybody could look at it in pretty kind of a succinct manner? Because, I threw out 20 ideas we're doing, and, every other school, how many there are, 40? I mean, you're going to have something.
31.
Somebody that, yeah.
We'd
something
like
goes through,
40.
yeah, okay. You got 31.
Someday.
20 ideas.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're going to have a report that somebody with a full-time job can't read in a week.
Right. So we're trying to find newer and newer avenues to do that. One of the ways, the best way I would say that we're doing that right now is through the board summit. So we're asking every board to set aside the fall summit date and the spring summit date. You can actually displace, if you need to, your board meeting for that month and come here and share those best practices. So we're trying to identify through the data that we have individuals who, when you go to the finance meeting, for example, at the summit, you're going to have someone present a best practice, something that they found works really, really well to everyone, and then lead a conversation of other thoughts that are in the room, other best practices in the room. We have begun to record, right, the notes from those meetings and disseminate those back out. The second way that we've used is our cohort groups, we call them. They're Google cohort groups. So if you are a member of a particular committee, you would be in, for example, the strategic planning cohort group, right? So it's an email group that all you have to do is type in strategic planning cohort, and it pops up, and it sends an email out to everyone that is on a strategic planning committee within the diocese. And then you can ask questions and share information and documents back and forth. We also are making available through our website, which I'll show you in a little bit, kind of give you a little tour of some of the things that are there. Some of those best practices, especially best practices related to our shared services, where we're offering shared services to the schools. And then finally, we offer to our schools our shared file, or what do we call it, Jill? It's a Google Drive. It's a shared file that every school can access the information and files that have been saved there to share among schools. So almost never does a school run into a situation where I'm wondering about X and someone hasn't already shared something related to that item that we can share out as a best practice. So, and most of the things that we put there are looked at ahead of time, right? We examine them to make sure that they are helpful. We don't put out there something that we think is going to mislead someone. Does that make sense?
So you as
those
a
are
diocese are kind of getting all these ideas, pulling them and putting them out back out in a succinct manner.
trying to.
Okay.
Yeah, we're getting better at it. We also are going through our strategic planning process. We go out and visit every school every year, and we're collecting on 4 different areas of our strategic plan a list. It's the only way to get the data, right? It's a list. What are the new ways that you're adding programs to your school this year, right? And then we collect a list so that every board member will then be able to see that list and go, oh, there's some cool things going on in some other schools. So trying to collect them in as succinct a method as we can and get it back out to our schools. Yes, there was a question back there first, and then we'll come up here.
Yeah, what were the dates for the Fall Board Summit?
November 4 is the Fall Summit.
And then May 5th.
Is it May 5th? Yeah, thank you, Jill. I should have put those right on here, and I didn't. November 4 and May 5, 6:30 to 8:30, same time. And we'll be here in the center only. We'll start in A, B, and C, and then separate out to rooms. Yes?
Well, I'm just curious, when you talk about, you said moving toward an alliance of Catholic schools and shared resources, in the long term, is there any discussion about supporting schools and addressing the disparities in facilities, technology, supporting schools in those areas?
From the standpoint of best practice and from the standpoint of helping you understand what other schools that have done that's been successful for them, absolutely. But from the standpoint of becoming one entity that is run centrally, that's not part of our vision, right? Every individual school has its own budget and its own revenue sources, right? And as a result of that, we are not going to the level of collecting all of your revenue and redistributing it back to every school, right? It is a local decision. That's part of that subsidiarity and that balance. So it's a great question.
I guess a follow-up would be, so for example, if, every school is going through some sort of, like an internet provider, right?
Mhm.
So why wouldn't the diocese say, you know what, we're gonna go with this provider, and you're gonna pay for your school's portion, but then we get a discount on that service? I guess, why wouldn't you move towards something like that?
And we are.
Okay.
That is that network of shared services that we're creating, and I should let Jill talk about that because we talk about integration of technology services all the time, and we use Smart Tuition, Smart Aid, Infinite Campus, Canvas, BeanGarter payroll system, Connect Now, and Parasoft for our finance software. So we have a lot of those kinds of services, and we also use the Google platform and Google Drives and all of that to house all of our school information. So we have put a lot of that effort forward, and in fact, many schools have opted into some of those as a collaborative. Some schools are compelled to be a part of, for example, the marketing communications, right? We all contribute to that, and what the schools contribute adds up to about $70,000 a year in revenue, and then the diocese contributes $80,000, and we spend $150,000 on marketing that markets our Catholic schools all together to soften the market so that when you reach out and your marketing materials go out, you get that co-branded feeling that we're all part of something bigger, this alliance of Catholic schools. We respect the independent nature, but we are building an alliance through a series of shared services. So marketing, communications, enrollment, admissions. We have a number of shared services that we offer. Technology is another area. Curriculum is another area. So lots and lots of those, and we're developing those all the time to take advantage of to take advantage of economies of scale.
Dave, the only thing I would add is that that's saving our individual schools a lot of time and just doing the homework and the research on that. So that when they're making a decision about technology, for example, we can give them, okay, here are our top 3 options, and here's some consortiums that are happening. Or if it's the strong thing that they should all do, all school has a voice in that decision, but that they can all move together at that discounted rate or with that best practice. So really saving the expertise and the time at the local level to do everything else.
And when we're negotiating for 31 schools, it makes a big difference in the cost that we
I
offer.
bet.
Yeah.
So I guess as when you're a new board member too, like, how do we get educated on what services are available to us? So if you're on a marketing committee, how do you become educated on how to access those services?
First of all, don't miss the summit. And then your marketing committee should meet with Greg Gearing, our marketing communications coordinator here at the diocese, who will bring you and help you with all of that. So if it's in the admissions enrollment area, you'll want to meet with Lucia. If it's in the governance area, you'll probably want to meet with me. If it's in the curriculum or technology area, you'll want to meet with Jill or Aaron. So our staff will come out and help you understand what your school is asking for and needs. And I'll tell you, the schools that ask, receive.
Yeah.
The schools that don't, we're kind of busy. So, it's really important that your schools are asking. We are at a point where we no longer have the resources to be able to take care of every ask, but we're doing absolutely our best to get that information out. Yes.
So given that conversation, on that continuum between subsidiarity and solidarity,
Mm-hmm.
collectively as 31 schools, where are we?
Well, we're working, Jim, to be here, right? That's where we're working to be, or maybe here, closer to that line, right? The more shared services we can offer, the higher we get on that toward a centralized, centralized functions. And as we get high-functioning boards of limited jurisdiction, that's where we're trying to be, right? Boards, like I said, are at some point along this sort of, continuum. Very few are still here. Very few. Yeah. All right. I'm going to keep moving in the interest of time. At this point again, just in case there are any questions that you want to make sure we don't miss, I just want to give you an opportunity. I put one in there already because I wanted to make sure I don't miss it, and that is, how does the Bridging Faith and Future strategic plan create a more balance between the two principles, right? And so I wanted to draw your attention to the Catholic Schools Bridging Faith and Future plan that you have in front of you. For those of you who are new board members, this will be new to you. For those of you who aren't, you've seen it a million times. And I love the looks I'm getting by some of you that have seen it a million times, because that means I'm doing my job. This isn't a surprise to most of you. So this strategic plan, again, I always take this and I point to the two black boxes. What is the one phrase in those black boxes that is repeated? This is a vision for an alliance of Catholic schools, expanding outstanding educational ministry. So it's all about that. That's what we're about, right? So that's our vision. And everything on this plan is designed to help us create that alliance and grow through a series of shared services, right? That's what that alliance means, respecting independence while sharing economies of scale. So I wanted to point that out to you. We're not going to go through this in any detail, but it is important, if you're new, to really take a look at that and understand it. And I do want to spend, no burning questions, I guess, because I didn't see any others added there. I want to spend a little time on the board's role in strategic planning, because I think this is the most critical role of every board, and sometimes it's the last thing they get to. So we got to kind of turn that around. The board is responsible for oversight, creation, implementation, and assessment of the school's strategic plan. Now, does that mean you create all the elements? Of course not, right? And I would tell you that, this is Sue's quote, I use it all the time, there's 100 ways to do strategic planning right? But they all include these things. Now, Sue, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but this is my observation. They should be a result of a community-wide collaborative process. And the best practice would say that should be facilitated by a professional. If you have someone in your community facilitate it, it will get kind of railroaded toward that person or individual's own biases. So it's important that the board set aside some funding to help with strategic planning, at least with the facilitation of strategic planning. That should be a high priority for a board. It should be responsive to data, and first and foremost, I'm glad Jill's here, accreditation, visitation reports. That's the first place. It is based upon the 13 standards and 72 benchmarks of the National Standards and Benchmarks for Effective Catholic Schools. And every school, after its visit, will be scored according to all 72 benchmarks. And there's very specific rubrics about how to get from a 2 to a 3, a 3 to a 4, a 1 to a 2. Very specific rubrics. So those are data you want to use in your strategic planning. So we always recommend that strategic planning should happen in year 2 of your cycle. Year 1 is your visit. Year 2, you create or update your strategic plan. And it's a 5-year cycle. So years 2, 3, and 4, you're going to be operating according to the plan. Year 5, you're doing self-study again and visit. And then you rinse and repeat. It's a living document. It's never all done. It's something that we do on a regular basis. They should be aligned to or informed by the diocesan plan. This was a collaborative effort of the entire diocese, and as a result, you'll see yourself in there somewhere, right? So allow your board to be informed by some of that information, and your plans in return will inform our plan the next time around. So they inform one another and they work together in that way. And then it's a living document that becomes your agenda and your faculty's agenda. Both, right? Your agenda and your faculty's agenda. Now I want to show you something that will help you with this. Faculty generally work on the internal things related to school improvements. Boards work on the external things related to school improvement. And based on the national standards and benchmarks, I'm going to escape here a second and go back to our website. Sorry. And so if you go to strategic planning resources here, I want to pull up this National Catholic School Standards poster. Now, I know that's small, and it looks a lot like the back of this, but it's not. The back of this are the 4 areas of our strategic plan and all of our tactics. These are the 70 benchmarks and 13 standards of the National the National Standards and Benchmarks, the NSBECs that I've been talking about. And the 9 defining characteristics, which I think are just important to keep in view anytime you're looking at these standards. So here we have 4 areas: mission and Catholic identity, governance and leadership, academic excellence, and operational vitality. Where do you think most of the board's work is? Primarily the 2 areas where most of the board work is. Governance and leadership and operational vitality, right? Those are the 2 areas where the board has most. Now, Catholic identity and mission is clearly a part of the board's work as well, but typically a lot of these things are done internally within the school. It's what touches the kids every day, but some of this is related to the family, and the board is going to need to get engaged in. But typically, boards are focused most on governance and leadership and operational vitality in their strategic planning, and school faculty are mostly engaged in mission and Catholic identity and academic excellence. Does that make sense? The internal and the external functions of the school. So I just wanted to point that out as another resource that you will have available to you when you are doing strategic planning. All right, skipping back here 1 second. I wanted to give you, lastly, did I mention that a strategic plan has to become your agenda? This is where you're building your agendas from, right? If it's not in the strategic plan, you shouldn't be working on it. If you should be working on it, it's not in the strategic plan, add it to your strategic plan, right? That should become your focal point and your agenda. So I want to give you a little tour of our website resources for you before we wrap up. And so this area, school board training, strategic planning and governance, is that area you're going to want to go to. You saw some of the training materials. There is hours of material here. We had Catholic School Management back in 2011 come in, a national consulting firm who helped us with these, and we've broken the training into these smaller segments so that you can view it and really get a sense for contemporary Catholic school governance today. There's hours worth of information here. Again, I would recommend Fundamental Premises for all board members, and go to the committee that you're on and take a look at those materials as well. Strategic planning resources, there's just a ton of information here for strategic plan. And I want to thank Sue and her committee for that information. This planning map guide leads you through, it's a manual on how to create one of these for your school. Now again, I said there's 100 ways to do it right. You don't have to do it this way. It's just one way. But it's a way that we've identified that might help you, and we've put templates together to help you with each of the parts. So you'll be running along here, why the approach and all of this, and then you get to, oh, there's a template for that resource. Click on the template and it pops up or downloads for you in a publisher version so that you can easily put the information into there. But it takes you step by step through a planning process similar to the one that we used. And one of our schools, St. Pat's in Parnell, was nice enough to go through this process, and as they did, they wrote a series of letters. This is when we sent a letter to the timeline, and this is when you send a letter to your community. Here's what it might say. Here's when you send a whatever. So it's all there so that, again, we're sharing those best practices just to make it easier on boards to organize and to do this work. There's a sample parish survey. All of this is available to you. The planning session presentation, the PowerPoint is all there for you. There's a SWOT sample and a template. Like I said, the strategic planning map template, just like this one. Annual planning tactics worksheet. And then our plan is also there for you to reference. And as I showed before, the National Catholic School Standards poster that you're going to want to pay close attention to so that you're well aligned to accreditation. Again, use that visiting report as a way. Now, it's one piece of data. I know there's lots of other pieces. We provide you with program effectiveness surveys every year, Catholic identity survey, one or the other each year. We provide you with an annual progress report on a number of important things. Use that data and any other data that you're collecting in your school to create your strategic plan.
Dave, I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that the committees are where the work happens, but this strategic planning process is a lot of work. Is there a specific committee that strategic planning should fall under?
Your strategic planning committee, yes.
Which is policy and planning, or is that mission?
It can be policy and planning. Sometimes people put them together. Your strategic plan is your primary vehicle. You're going to want to create policy that helps you get that done, right?
There was a slide earlier that instead of saying policy and planning, you said strategic planning and policy, and you put the word strategic in front of that, and I was wondering.
Just to bring
where
emphasis,
that's
yeah,
meant to go.
just to add emphasis to it. I should make them all exactly parallel, but some people put them together because some schools, you know, we have diocesan policy for a lot of stuff. So some schools don't spend that much time on the policy piece. They create policy that helps them accomplish their plan, right? So does that make sense? It's the same committee or it's separate committees. You can have a policy committee and a planning committee. It depends on what you need at your school. So if your policies haven't been reviewed in a dozen years, you might want to have a policy committee till that work is done.
I was thinking more mission effectiveness, because that kind of would start to create the vision and mission and a lot of that, making sure the school's going in the right direction.
Well, and the process.
The early stuff.
Yes. Yes. The process itself needs to be owned by your strategic planning committee or your policy and planning committee. You bet. Great question. I want you to, this boards of limited jurisdiction description, that little cheat sheet, you know, your main high-level responsibilities is right there. This is where all the models are located. So, and I want to just walk through one with you. So we have our parish-owned, our interparochial-owned, our diocesan-owned secondary schools, and then we have both of them listed. And then we have San Juan Diego Academy and Wings, because those are just a little different. Divine Providence and San Juan Diego Academy are just a little different variation on the theme of an interparochial model. Our independent schools models are not here because they're not owned by us, right? They're literally independent, private, and so they're not part of our materials here. But they're still boards of limited jurisdiction in their own right, in their own way. So I just want to take a look at what's here under parish elementary schools that are owned by the parish, acting with a board of limited jurisdiction. This is just the initial institution of those, and then I wanted you to see the diagrammatic description that exists for all of these types of boards. There's 3 levels of governance in Catholic schools. Ownership, you'll see the green level, governance, the red level, and administration. And it just kind of clearly keeps it, the principal, the staff, our administration, the governance is the board, and the ownership is the pastor and the superintendent and the diocese, right, bishop. And then those clearly defined roles. When you get into a situation where you're not sure someone's acting appropriately, this is where you go, right to your model. And so you see what the bishop's responsible for, what pieces of canon law, what the superintendent of schools is responsible for. This one irritates people, but notice item A under Canon 806, which is part of the superintendent's responsibility. And a little laughter there, that's good. little levity. But that is a primary responsibility for the superintendent, is to assure the standards are met for the academic calendar year. Bishop wants it to be very clear that no school decides the length of its own calendar. And he has hired me to make sure that that standard is met. So, again, when questions arise, this is where the pastor's responsibilities are, and you'll see that reserve powers are there. And then, of course, the board of directors, those responsibilities. This is another format of the same that summary document that I showed you earlier. A lot of the same information is there. Then, of course, in some parishes, or your principal or administration, so you have a summary version and then you have a longer version of all the things they're responsible for. Sorry, principals. And then you ultimately have your some of these other organizations that exist. We have the Grand Rapids Area Catholic Grand Rapids Area Catholic Elementary Athletic Council, GRACEAC. Some of you have heard of it. Your Home and School Association. So some of those roles. And then sometimes we have a canonical administrator that's separate from the pastor. And then these would be their annual responsibilities. And then finally, those responsibilities of the board, which are identified in your bylaws, and those are all here. Now, every school has all these blanks filled in. You have documents at your own school, and we have them here too. You can share them anytime you want, and we're happy to do that. And then the final piece that's in here are for all of your committees, you will have committee charges. So what is that committee ultimately responsible for? These are already developed for you, at least as a starting place. You don't have to start from scratch. And so all those committee charges are all here. All right, and is what I wanted to bring to your attention tonight. I am wondering if, and I will just give you one last chance here to leave us any remaining questions, comments, or feedback that you'd like to share. If you wouldn't mind taking a minute and texting that to that same number, that would be really helpful. We can collect these here. If anyone has a last minute question, we have 5 minutes before we're to be done, and I promised Jim we would be out on time, if not early. Any remaining burning questions?
When you send out the documents, would you go back to the first slide to ask questions and just make sure that some of those were answered? You don't have to do it now because I know we're late on time, but maybe when you send them out, send out the video of it.
This video.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Once we have it all set and online, we will put a link to it. Great, great.
Maybe somewhat of a question, observation. I'm new to the Catholic faith. I'm enjoying it. Thank you for what you do, and just put my daughter into Catholic school. I'm very impressed with the curriculum and the program, and glad it's there and a resource. As I sit in church, 52 weeks a year, 1 week per year is Catholic School Week, which is 2% of the time. And I think it's very important to keep Catholic education up, because children that go through a Catholic education are 8 times more likely to stay in the faith. And the religion rates in the U.S. are just cratering, unfortunately. Is there any?
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
We have pastors of parishes that mention the school weekly, and we have pastors of parishes that mention the school during Catholic Schools Week. So as a board of limited jurisdiction, you got to be all over your pastor about the importance of the school, right? You have some authority in your parish. Now, do that in a nice way, build a relationship, grow, but your pastor needs to be bolstered in his confidence about what's going on. The more his parishioners are talking to him and his workers are talking to him about how important this is, the more he's going to be inclined to share that information. So it's all of our jobs to bring that to the pastor's attention, right?
Just so you know, Ben, this was actually a discussion point that a few of us had with David, that's the school board level, that we think that it would be useful to maybe remind our pastors and encourage them that they really should be talking about their Catholic schools, and then if they have CCD or PSR programs as well, and adult faith formation, that it's a broad continuum from basically from birth to death. You have an educational component that should be stressed as a church, because as you pointed out, especially if they're in a school context, they're 8 times more likely
Yeah,
to stay in the faith. So
That's big. That's why I want my kid there. Is that a top priority for the bishop? I know he would have a lot of sway and influence with direction.
It absolutely is. He talks about Catholic schools all the time. He doesn't apologize for talking about Catholic schools, and he makes it very clear to his pastors in all the meetings that I'm in that Catholic school pastors are those pastors who he's placed, who he has the most confidence in, right? He places them very carefully and only places them when he has confidence that they can do the job. And so a huge priority for the bishop. I wanted to point out one more thing. It's a great point. And I noticed someone asking a question regarding policy. Someone mentioned it earlier too. I just wanted to point out a couple of other resources here really quick. Underneath all of these resources, you'll see policies and reports. That's our Catholic School Policy Manual. So you can always when you see that, it's the most up-to-date policies we have. Everything will always be updated there. And also, our curriculum is also located here. So click on that. If you haven't read the curriculum, kudos to Jill and all of our teachers. It's amazing. It's clearly a Catholic school curriculum. You will find it beautiful. All right, I want to peek back here at some of these. Oops, there were more.
I want to add back to Bishop's commitment. Last spring, he was awarded a national award from NSCA for his commitment to Catholic education. And if you ever get him talking, he will always mention Catholic schools in his explanations for his priorities. So
sometimes you just have to be opportunistic. We were one of 8 parishes that participated in the Our Shepherds, Our Future capital campaign. And if you haven't been involved, you will.
Yes, you
And
will.
we were very successful. So I took the opportunity to say just today in a text message to our pastor to echo your comment. Great job on the campaign. If you talked as much about our school as you did about the capital campaign, our enrollment would increase. And he said, thanks. That needed to be said, and I needed to hear it.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
We'll see what happens. I'll probably not be at the November meeting.
There's some outstanding questions. One of the things was look back at the questions from the previous slides. There's some outstanding questions here. I'm going to do some studying of these. There are a few. If people want, if the person who asked the question about a technology committee wants to stick around, I'm happy to address that specifically. There's no right or wrong on that. Some people have them, some people don't. Again, it depends on whether you have staff in the school that have been hired to do it. Probably don't need a board committee. If you don't, you probably want one, right? So, but there are more good questions here. I'm going to look and see, and when we send out a follow-up email with this video link, I'll try to see if I can answer some of those questions. But if you had one of these specific questions, that was the policy review process, and you felt like we didn't get to that, there's so many things. When you look at what a board does, there's like 140 things that a board actually assesses itself about according to the national standards and benchmarks. So I know we can't get to all of them. This is a process, so hopefully you will stay engaged in the training process, being available at summits and that sort of thing. But happy to see what we can answer as we go forward. So let us pray. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Have a wonderful evening, everyone.
Thank you.